Hello. Welcome to my YouTube channel, True Fear and Fiction. Step into the shadows and explore the chilling world of horror. Before watching, please like and subscribe to support me in producing more stories. This helps spreading the video and reaching more people. Thank you for your support and enjoy watching. The moon hung low in the sky, a sliver of silver casting an eerie glow over the empty streets as I drove through the heart of the city. Driving for Uber at night had become a routine for me, but on this particular evening, an unsettling feeling gripped me. The air felt thick with tension, and every shadow seemed to hold a secret. Just past midnight, my phone pinged with a ride request. I glanced at the pickup location and frowned. An old cemetery on the outskirts of town. My instincts screamed at me to decline, but the need for cash pushed me to accept. Besides, how spooky could it really be? As I pulled up to the iron gates, the shadows of the tombstones loomed ominously in the moonlight. The place felt alive in a way that made my skin crawl. I waited, the sound of crickets filling the silence, and then I saw her, a woman in a long, flowing dress, her hair cascading around her shoulders like a dark waterfall. She walked toward me, her bare feet barely making a sound on the gravel path. "Are you my ride?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper that sent shivers down my spine. Yeah. Where to?" I replied, forcing a smile despite the unease curling in my gut. "Just drive," she said, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. I nodded, trying to shake off the sense of foreboding. As I pulled away, I couldn't help but glance at her in the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, almost luminous, and her eyes seemed to hold a deep sorrow. I cleared my throat, trying to break the silence. "So, what brings you to the cemetery?" "I'm looking for something," she replied, her voice distant, as if she were lost in a memory. "Something I lost long ago." I could feel a chill creeping into the car, the atmosphere thickening with every passing moment. "What did you lose?" I ventured, curiosity overcoming my fear. "Myself," she answered softly, and in that moment, I realized there was something profoundly unsettling about her presence. As we drove deeper into the night, the city faded behind us, replaced by the creeping darkness of the outskirts. The streets grew narrower, and soon we found ourselves on a winding road that seemed to lead nowhere. The silence enveloped us, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves outside. Are you okay?" I asked, sensing the heaviness hanging in the air. "I'm not sure," she replied, her voice tinged with sadness. "I've been lost for so long." I turned to her, a pang of empathy piercing through my anxiety. "Lost how? What do you mean?" "It's hard to explain," she said, her eyes locking onto mine in the mirror. "I was taken from this world before my time, and now I wander, searching for something that was never given to me, a chance to say goodbye." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. "What happened to you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I was murdered," she replied flatly, the weight of her statement hanging in the air like a heavy fog. "In that cemetery. No one knows what truly happened." A chill raced through me as I processed her words. I had heard rumors about that cemetery, how it was haunted by a woman who had vanished without a trace. I swallowed hard, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "What can I do to help?" "Take me back to the grave where I was buried," she said, her tone now urgent. "I need to find peace." Despite every instinct telling me to turn back, I nodded. "Okay, let's go." As I drove back toward the cemetery, the air grew colder, and I could feel an electric tension crackling around us. When I arrived, the moon illuminated the headstones, casting long shadows that danced in the night. "Over there," she pointed toward a section of the graveyard, her voice trembling with anticipation. "That's where I am." I parked the car and stepped out, my heart pounding in my chest. The cemetery was still, the only sound the rustle of leaves in the wind. I followed her to a small, weathered headstone, its engraving barely legible. "Here," she whispered, kneeling down, "this is where I rest." I looked at the stone, feeling a deep sadness wash over me. "What can I do?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "Remember me," she said, her voice breaking. "Tell my story." As she spoke, I felt an overwhelming sense of grief in the air, a weight that seemed to press down on my chest. "I promise," I said, tears stinging my eyes. "I won't forget you." Suddenly, A gust of wind swept through the cemetery, swirling around us, and I felt the temperature drop. The shadows seemed to stretch and writhe as the atmosphere shifted. The woman's form began to glow, a soft luminescence that illuminated the dark night. "Thank you," she said, her voice echoing with emotion. "You've set me free." With those words, her figure began to dissolve, the light engulfing her as she smiled one last time. I watched in awe as the glow slowly faded, leaving behind a serene stillness in the air. The heaviness lifted, replaced by a profound sense of peace. I sat there, trembling, the reality of what had just happened settling in. I had helped a lost soul find closure. As I stood up, I glanced back at the headstone, a feeling of warmth radiating through me. "I will remember you," I promised, my heart full of emotion. I returned to my car, still reeling from the encounter. As I drove away from the cemetery, I felt a sense of purpose welling up inside me. I would share her story, ensure she was not forgotten. The night felt different now, lighter somehow, as if I had been part of something greater than myself. With the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon, I knew that even in the darkest places, there was hope, and that sometimes it took a lost soul to remind us of our own humanity. The clock struck midnight, the soft chime echoing in the stillness of my car as I sat in the dimly lit parking lot of a convenience store, sipping a lukewarm coffee. The glow of my Uber app flickered to life, signaling a ride request. I accepted it without thinking twice, eager to distract myself from the lingering shadows of the night. The pickup location was a stretch of road near the old train tracks, long abandoned and rumored to be haunted. My stomach twisted with unease as I navigated my way through the winding streets. As I arrived, I noticed a thick fog creeping in, swirling around the trees like a shroud. I parked, and the moment I turned off the engine, the silence enveloped me like a heavy blanket. Then I saw her, a woman emerging from the fog, dressed in a vintage white dress that fluttered slightly in the cold breeze. Her hair cascaded down her shoulders, and her eyes seemed to glimmer with an otherworldly light. "Are you my ride?" she asked, her voice soft yet piercing. "Yes," I replied, my heart racing. "Where to?" "Just drive," she said, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. I nodded, my instincts on high alert as I pulled away from the eerie scene. As we drove, I glanced in the rearview mirror, unable to shake the feeling that something was off. Her expression was distant, almost mournful, as if she were gazing through the car window at something only she could see. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. "Why?" "Because I am one," she replied flatly, and my heart dropped. I forced a laugh, trying to dismiss the unease creeping into my thoughts. "Very funny," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. "I'm serious," she continued, her tone unwavering. "I died here long ago." I swallowed hard, my palms sweating against the steering wheel. "What happened to you?" "I was waiting for someone," she replied, her voice tinged with sorrow. "A promise was made, but it was never kept. Now I wander, searching for closure." A chill ran through me. "What kind of promise?" "I was meant to be taken away, to escape this life," she explained, her gaze fixed out the window as if searching for something in the fog. "But it never happened. I was left behind." "Where do you want to go?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Back to the tracks," she said, her tone filled with urgency. "That's where it all began." Despite my instincts screaming at me to turn back, I nodded and made a U-turn, heading toward the abandoned tracks. The fog thickened as we approached, wrapping around the car like a ghostly embrace. When we arrived, I parked the car near the rusty tracks, their jagged edges barely visible in the dim light. The air was thick with anticipation, and I felt a strange energy crackling around us. "Do you see it?" she asked, her voice now a whisper, almost lost in the fog. "See what?" I replied, my pulse quickening. "Look closely," she urged, her eyes shining in the darkness. I squinted into the fog, and slowly, shapes began to materialize, ghostly figures moving in and out of view, flickering like flames. I felt my breath hitch in my throat as I realized I was witnessing a scene from the past, the vibrant energy of a crowd waiting for a train that would never arrive. "This is where I waited," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "The last train. I was supposed to leave with them. Why didn't you? I asked, my curiosity overpowering my fear. They didn't come for me, she said, sadness washing over her features. I was left behind, forgotten. I looked back at the spectral figures, feeling a sense of dread mixed with compassion. What can I do? Help me find the last train, she said, desperation creeping into her voice. I need to say goodbye to the life I never had. I hesitated, then nodded. Okay, I'll help you. As I stepped out of the car, the chill in the air deepened, wrapping around me like a shroud. I could feel her presence beside me, a mix of sorrow and determination guiding my steps. We walked along the tracks, the fog swirling around us, the sound of distant whispers filling the air. The ghostly figures faded in and out of sight, their faces a mixture of hope and despair. Over there, she pointed to a faded signpost standing crookedly by the tracks. The letters were barely legible, but it read, "Last stop." I approached it, my heart racing. What does this mean? This is where I waited, she said, her voice trembling. I want to leave this place. I want to be free. As I stood by the signpost, I felt a strange energy surge through the air, a pulse that vibrated with intensity. I closed my eyes, focusing on the moment, on the essence of what she had lost. You can move on, I said, feeling a sense of urgency. You just need to let go. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I've been waiting for so long. I don't know if I can. You have to try, I urged, stepping closer to her. Say goodbye, embrace what was, and let go of what could have been. In that moment, the fog thickened around us, and the whispers grew louder, swirling like a tempest. The ghostly figures began to gather, their faces etched with longing. I'm ready, she said, her voice gaining strength. I'm ready to say goodbye. The air crackled with energy as she stepped forward, reaching out toward the ghostly figures. I love you all, she called out, her voice strong and clear. Thank you for the memories. As she spoke, the spectral figures began to shimmer, their forms flickering in the night. I felt the ground beneath me vibrate with intensity, and the atmosphere shifted. A train whistle echoed in the distance, a haunting melody that wrapped around us. Can you hear it? She asked, her eyes wide with realization. Yes, I shouted, overwhelmed with emotion. It's coming. In that moment, the train appeared through the fog, a magnificent phantom adorned with flickering lights, gliding silently along the tracks. The air crackled with energy, and I felt her presence beside me, glowing brighter with each passing second. I'm finally free, she said, a smile spreading across her face. Thank you for helping me find my way. As the train came to a stop, she stepped toward it, her form shimmering in the moonlight. The ghostly figures gathered around her, their faces filled with joy and relief. With one final glance back at me, she whispered, You'll never forget me, will you? No, I replied, tears streaming down my cheeks. I promise. And just like that, she stepped onto the train, disappearing into the light. The train whistled one last time before gliding away into the fog, leaving behind an echoing silence. I stood alone on the tracks, the weight of the moment settling over me. The fog began to lift, and the first hints of dawn illuminated the horizon. As I made my way back to my car, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. I had helped a lost soul find her way, and in doing so, I had found a part of myself. Driving away from the tracks, I glanced back one last time, knowing I would carry her memory with me forever. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always a way to let go and find peace. It was a chilly autumn night, the kind where the air seemed to crackle with an unsettling energy. I had just finished a long shift driving for Uber, but the app buzzed again, a last-minute request flashing on my screen. I hesitated for a moment, but the prospect of a final fare tugged at me. The pickup location was an old mansion on the outskirts of town, one that I had heard whispers about, rumors of hauntings and tragedy woven into its history. As I drove through the winding, overgrown path leading to the mansion, the moon cast an eerie glow over the dilapidated structure. Vines snaked up the sides, and broken windows looked like vacant eyes staring into the night. I parked my car, heart thumping, and stepped out, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the place. The heavy front door creaked open, and there she stood, a young woman in a vintage gown, her long hair cascading around her shoulders. Her face was pale, almost luminescent in the dim light, and her eyes shone with a mix of sadness and desperation. "Are you my ride?" she asked, her voice soft yet resonant. "Yes," I managed to say, my throat dry. "Where to?" "Just drive," she replied, sliding into the back seat without another word. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, trying to gauge her demeanor. She seemed lost in thought, gazing out the window as we pulled away from the mansion. The atmosphere in the car was thick with tension, and an unshakable feeling settled in my stomach. I could sense something was off. Her presence felt both comforting and chilling at the same time. I glanced at my phone to check the destination, but the app was frozen. "Where are we headed?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Take me to the lake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The lake? Is that near here?" "It's where I used to go," she replied, her gaze still distant. "It's peaceful there." The road twisted and turned, the trees surrounding us towering like silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. With every passing moment, the fog thickened, wrapping around us like a shroud. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the drive. As we neared the lake, I couldn't help but feel an increasing sense of dread. "What happened at the lake?" I asked cautiously. "Loss," she answered, her voice trembling slightly. "It's where my story ended, and where I've been trapped ever since." My heart raced. "Trapped? What do you mean?" "I was taken from this world too soon," she said, her voice breaking. "I want to remember. I want to let go." "Let go of what?" I pressed, a mixture of curiosity and fear swirling inside me. "Of the pain," she replied, tears glistening in her eyes, "of not being able to say goodbye." As we reached the lake, I parked near the shore, the moonlight reflecting off the water's surface, creating a hauntingly beautiful scene. I turned off the engine, and the sudden silence enveloped us. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the water and the rustle of leaves in the wind. "Come," she said, stepping out of the car. I followed, my feet crunching on the gravel as I moved closer to the water's edge. "Do you see it?" she asked, pointing out across the lake. I squinted into the darkness, trying to make sense of what she was showing me. For a moment, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Then I caught a flicker, a figure standing on the opposite shore, partially obscured by the fog. "Who is that?" I whispered, dread pooling in my stomach. "My family," she said, her voice trembling. "They've come for me." A wave of emotion washed over me, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "What do you need to do?" "I need to tell them I'm sorry," she said, stepping closer to the water. "I need them to know I never meant to leave them." Suddenly, the figure across the lake began to move, stepping into the water, and my heart raced. "Wait, you can't go out there." "I have to," she replied, her voice stronger now. "I've waited so long for this moment." Before I could protest, she waded into the lake, the water shimmering around her. I watched, frozen, as she walked deeper, the water rising around her waist. "No," I shouted, panic rising within me. "You can't." But she turned back to me, her face a mix of determination and peace. "This is my chance. I'll finally be free." The figure across the lake gestured for her to come closer, and my heart sank as I realized the truth. This wasn't just a reunion, it was a goodbye. "Please," I called out, desperate to reach her. "Don't go." "I love you all," she said, her voice echoing across the water. "I'm so sorry for everything." With one final, lingering look, she plunged beneath the surface, the ripples spreading outward, distorting the reflection of the moon. I felt a weight settle in my chest as I screamed her name into the night. Silence fell, the water still once more. The figure had vanished, and the lake returned to its haunting calm. I stumbled back to the car, my heart racing, a wave of despair crashing over me. How could this be happening? The air felt thick with loss, and I felt utterly alone. As I drove away from the lake, the fog began to dissipate, revealing the road ahead. I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness left in her wake. Had I really just helped a ghost say goodbye, or had I imagined the whole thing? When I returned home, the events of the night swirled in my mind, haunting me as I lay in bed. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had lost something, someone, far more profound than just a fleeting encounter. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of that night lingered like a bittersweet echo. I found myself visiting the lake often, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but the water remained still, as if it held its secrets close. One night, I returned, the moon hanging full in the sky. As I stood by the shore, I felt a soft breeze wrap around me, carrying with it a sense of calm. I closed my eyes, allowing the sounds of nature to wash over me, when I heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible above the lapping water. "Thank you." I opened my eyes, heart racing. The moonlight shimmered across the lake, and in that moment, I felt her presence, a gentle warmth, a bittersweet goodbye. Though she was gone, I realized she would never truly leave me. From that night on, I carried her memory with me, a reminder that even in the depths of sorrow, there's a way to find peace and connection, transcending the boundaries between this world and the next. And every time I got into my car for another ride, I would remember the haunted fair that changed my life forever. It was just past 2 a.m. when I received the ping, the sound cutting through the stillness of the night like a knife. I had been winding down after a long shift, the quiet of the streets settling into a dull hum, but curiosity and a need for cash pulled me back to work. The pickup location sent a shiver down my spine. It was the old Willow Bridge, a spot notorious for tales of ghostly encounters and tragic accidents. As I drove toward the bridge, the fog began to roll in, thick and heavy, swallowing the streetlights whole. My headlights pierced through the mist, revealing the gnarled trees that lined the road, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers reaching out into the night. A sense of unease settled in the pit of my stomach, but I shook it off. I had a job to do. When I arrived at the bridge, I turned off the engine and stepped out, the air cool against my skin. The atmosphere felt charged, the silence almost deafening. I glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out from behind a tree, but the only thing that moved was the fog, swirling around like a restless spirit. Then I saw her, a woman standing at the edge of the bridge, her long, dark hair billowing in the wind, her white dress glowing eerily in the moonlight. She turned toward me, and for a moment I was frozen, a chill running down my spine. "Are you my ride?" she asked, her voice smooth yet haunting. Yeah," I managed to say, trying to shake off the fear. "Where to?" "Just drive," she replied, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. I nodded, feeling a strange compulsion to comply. As I drove, I could feel her presence in the back seat, heavy and intense. I glanced in the rearview mirror and met her gaze. Her eyes were deep pools of sorrow, reflecting a sadness that seemed to seep into the very fabric of the car. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked suddenly, her tone almost whimsical. "I don't know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why?" "Because I am one," she replied, her gaze unwavering. I laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. "You're kidding, right?" "No," she said softly. "I'm serious. I died here a long time ago, and I've been waiting for someone to take me home." My heart raced, fear battling with a strange sense of empathy. "How did you die?" I asked, feeling drawn into her story. "I was lost," she said, her voice breaking. "I made a choice to run away, and it cost me everything. I never got to say goodbye." The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. "I'm so sorry," I said, the sincerity of my response surprising even me. "What can I do?" "Just listen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to share my story." I nodded, gripping the steering wheel tightly as I navigated the winding roads. The trees loomed around us, the fog wrapping the car in a spectral embrace. "Go on," I urged, trying to focus on the road. "I was young and foolish," she began, her voice distant. "I thought I could escape everything, my family, my life. I ran away to be with someone I loved, but he wasn't what I thought he was. We fought, and in a moment of desperation, I tried to leave. I slipped on the bridge, fell into the water." The weight of her words settled heavily in the car. "I'm sorry," I said again, my heart aching for her. "That's so tragic." "It was my fault," she continued, her voice tinged with regret. "I should have listened to my heart, but I was too stubborn. I wanted freedom, but all I found was darkness." I felt the chill creeping back in, the realization hitting me hard. "What do you need from me?" I need to be remembered," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't want to be a ghost forever. I want my story to live on." As we drove deeper into the night, the fog thickened further, pressing against the windows like a living entity. The air was heavy, electric, with an unseen force. My skin prickled, but I pushed through the unease. "Where do you want me to take you?" I asked, feeling the weight of her sadness in the air. "Back to the bridge," she replied, her voice a fragile whisper. That's where it all began. The unease swelled in my chest, but I nodded and turned the car around. The drive back felt surreal, as if time itself was bending around us. I could feel the tension in the air, the atmosphere shifting with every passing moment. When we arrived at the bridge, I parked and turned off the engine. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of water lapping against the shore. I looked at her in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, I saw her as she once was, a vibrant young woman full of life and dreams. "Thank you for listening," she said, her voice barely a breath. "Now I can finally say goodbye." "Goodbye?" I echoed, a pang of panic gripping me. "What do you mean?" "I have to go back," she said, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "To the place where I fell. I need to find peace." Suddenly, the fog thickened even more, swirling around the car, obscuring my view. "Wait," I shouted, but before I could say more, the air shifted, and she was gone. My heart raced, and I jumped out of the car, searching the darkness. "Where are you?" I called, my voice echoing against the bridge, but the only response was the sound of the water below. I felt an overwhelming sense of loss, like a part of me had vanished with her. The bridge stood silent, the fog swirling, concealing whatever remnants of her might still linger there. Just as I was about to turn back, I heard it. A soft, mournful whisper carried by the wind. "Thank you for remembering me." I froze, the words sending a chill down my spine. "No, don't go." But the air was still once more, and I knew I was alone. I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing with the impossibility of what had just happened. Had I really encountered a ghost? Had I helped her find peace? Days passed, and I couldn't shake the feeling of emptiness. I returned to the bridge repeatedly, hoping to catch a glimpse of her spirit or hear her voice once more. Each time, I left with an ache in my heart and a sense of longing. Then, one night, as I stood at the edge of the bridge, the fog rolled in thick, wrapping around me like a familiar embrace. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the water below. "Are you there?" I whispered, feeling foolish yet hopeful. And then, just as before, I heard it, a gentle, melodic laugh carried by the wind, followed by her voice, softer this time. "Thank you for believing in me." The sensation washed over me, a mix of sorrow and warmth. I opened my eyes, feeling a lightness in my chest. I understood now. I might never see her again, but she would always live on in the stories we shared and in the hearts of those who believed. As I left the bridge that night, I felt a sense of closure. I would carry her memory with me, a reminder that even in the darkest places, hope could be found, and that sometimes the most haunting encounters were the ones that brought us closer to understanding ourselves.